I want to tell you something that most real estate agents in this area are not going to tell you on camera, and that is the Russian River floods. Not occasionally, not once in a blue moon. Guerneville, the town we are personally moving to, has flooded more than 38 times since 1940. And if you are thinking about buying a home up here, whether you're relocating like we are, or you're just looking for a weekend place on the river, you need to understand what that actually means before you fall in love with the property. Now, I am not saying this to scare you off, but I am saying it because we are moving here. I've done the research. I've gone deep on this, and I'd rather give you the real picture up front than have you figure it out 6 months after you close escrow. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through everything: the flood zones, the history, what it costs to insure, what to look for in a specific property, what questions to ask, and honestly, how to figure out whether this is really the right place for you. Now, this is going to be a longer one, so grab a cup of coffee and let's get to it. But before we jump in, let me be real about who I'm talking to. Now, if you have been seriously looking at homes in Guerneville, Monte Rio, Forestville, Rio Nido, maybe you've fallen in love with the redwoods, the river, the whole vibe, and you're somewhere in the back of your mind, there's this nagging question about flooding, then this video is going to be for you. I'm also talking to people relocating from somewhere else like we are. I spent 20 years doing real estate in San Diego, and I know a lot of markets inside and out, but when my husband and I started seriously looking at the Russian River area as a place to actually live, I had to do my homework all over again. Different market, different risk, different rules. And I want to share what homework I've done with you. If you are a seasoned local who's lived in the river for 30 years, some of this you already know, but stick around because some of it may have changed. FEMA just updated their flood maps for the entire watershed for the first time in 30 years in July 2024, and a lot of people, including some agents, are still catching up on exactly what that means. All right, let's talk about the river. So here's the thing about the Russian River you have to understand geographically. It starts way up in Mendocino County, runs 115 miles, and empties into the Pacific at Jenner. But the section that matters the most is the flood risk, is the lower stretch, roughly from Healdsburg down to the coast. That lower section runs you through a narrow canyon. The mountains come right up to the water. There's not a lot of room for that river to spread out. So when it does rain, it's what you call an atmospheric river, which basically is a massive fire hose of Pacific moisture pointing directly at Northern California. All that water has to go somewhere, and it doesn't have a lot of place to go. The result is the river moves fast. We're talking 24 to 48 hours from a storm starting to serious flooding in the communities along the lower river, and it doesn't creep up slowly, it moves. And here's the other piece of this. The watershed above these towns, the mountains, the forests, it can hold a lot of moisture, but once the soil is saturated from the first storm, the second storm produces a dramatic more runoff than it would have otherwise. This is exactly what happened in 2019. A series of atmospheric rivers hit back to back. By the time the last one came through, the ground had nothing left to absorb. The river hit 45 feet at Guerneville and caused over $155 million in damage. So that's the geography. Now let's talk about the specific communities, because not all of them carry the exact same risk. Now I'm going to go through the main communities you're probably looking at and give you an honest read on the flood risk for each one. So Guerneville is where we are personally relocating. So I'll start there, and I'll be straight with you. It has the highest flood risk of any valley in the community. Now it's built on a floodplain. Downtown is at river level. The lowest lying streets, Mill Street, Lower Main Street, Fern Road, near the river, can start flooding when the river hits 32 feet, which is the official flood stage. But here's the nuance. Not every property in Guerneville is the same. There are hillside properties above town that stay completely dry through major floods. There are elevated post and pier cabins that may get water under the house, but not in it. The community isn't monolithic, and the property matters enormously. Now, in Monte Rio, if you've driven through it, you know it's gorgeous, but it's another high-risk area. When the river hits 33%, Willow and Alder Streets flood. Old Bohemian Highway goes underwater. So if you're looking at riverside properties there, you need to understand that this is just part of the ownership experience. Rio Nido, this one's interesting. Most of Rio Nido is actually on a steep hillside above the river, so the direct flood risk is lower for many properties there, but it was one of the areas most affected by the July 2024 FEMA remapping, and the access road vulnerability is real. During a major event, you can get cut off even if your house stays dry. Now, Northwood, that's a mixed picture. The lower section of Redwood Drive can start flooding at 34 feet. Hillside properties there are largely fine. Forestville and Mirabel Park. Mirabel Park, which is down the river, starts flooding at 33 feet. Now, Mirabel Heights on top of the bluffs is a very different story. If you're looking in Forestville itself, which is a bit further from the main river, the risk profile is there, but it's not zero. Healdsburg is further upstream, wider floor plan, less severe, but it has FEMA flood zone designations along the adjacent rivers, so you just got to be aware of that. Here's the bottom line on all of this. Every property in this valley has an individual risk profile. The street matters, the elevation matters, the foundation matters, and I'll get into all of those in just a couple of minutes. Listen, I want to give you a reference that I use all the time. There is a gauge on the Guerneville Bridge. It's monitored by NOAA in real time, and you can actually look it up at any time on your phone. The website is water.noaa.gov/GUEC1. I'm going to link that in the description. So here's how the stages break down in plain English. 32 feet is the official stage. At that level, some of the lowest streets in Guerneville start taking on water. Lower Mill Street, Old Bohemian Highway in Monte Rio. 33 feet, the intersection of 116 and Drake Road closes in Guerneville. Willow and Alder and Monte Rio flood, and the Mirabel Trailer Park in Forestville starts flooding. At 34 feet, you start seeing water in some of the Riverside's resorts in Guerneville, Parker's, Johnson's Creek, and Creekside. 35 feet, numerous residents and businesses in the lower sections. These river towns are now flooded. At 36 feet, this is when the sheriff typically starts issuing mandatory evacuation orders covering the whole lower corridor from Healdsburg all the way down to Jenner. Listen, and then there are historic events. 45 feet in 2019, 48 feet in 1995. The all-time record was 49.5 feet in February of 1986. At that level, residents were wading through their waist-deep in water in the streets. Now, does the river hit 49 feet every year? No, but it does hit 32 feet roughly 2 to 4 years, and in recent history. And now over a 20 to 30 year homeownership horizon, which is how you should think about the home purchase, a significant flood event is not a possibility, it's near certainty. But that's not a reason not to buy up here. It's a reason to buy the right property. Okay, so I need to stop here and talk about something that every single buyer looking at in this area needs to know. In January 2024, FEMA published a new flood map on the entire Russian River watershed. It was the first update in 30 years. Think about that. The previous maps were made in the 1990s before a lot of major atmospheric river events we've ever experienced. Now, before 2029, that flood reshaped how we think about the river's capacity. Now, the new maps reclassified approximately 2,500 parcels in communities like Rio Nido, Guerneville, Monte Rio, and Northwood. And those properties that were used to be classified low risk are now in a special flood hazard area, which is the official high risk designation that triggers mandatory flood insurance requirements. And here's the thing that got a lot of people in this community upset. Many homeowners felt blindsided. The mailers that went out were confusing. The public comment period happened, but a lot of people didn't realize it was what was happening or what it all meant. So where does that leave you as a buyer? Well, it means that if you're looking at anything along the lower Russian River, you need to verify the flood zones using the current maps, not the ones from 2020, not a natural hazard disclosure report that was ordered last year on a different transaction, the July 31st, 2024 effective date. You can also look up any property at msc.fema.gov. The FEMA Flood Map Service Center, I'll put that link in the description below as well, and your agent should be doing this as a matter of course. If they're not, that's a problem. Let's talk money for a second, because this is the part that can genuinely surprise buyers who haven't thought about it. Now, if you are buying a property in what FEMA calls a special flood hazard area, that's the high risk zone, typically designated in zones A or zone AE on the maps, and you're getting a federally backed mortgage, flood insurance is not optional. Your lender will require it as a condition of your loan. It's not part of your homeowner's insurance policy. It is a completely separate policy. And under FEMA's newer pricing system, which is called Risk Rating 2.0, fully rolled out in 2023, the cost is now based on your specific property's individual risk profile and not just the flood zone that you're in. So what does that all mean? Well, an elevated post and pier cabin that sits on 3 or 4 feet above the base of the elevation set back from the river, that property might run you $800 to $1,800 a year for flood insurance. Call it $70 to $150 a month. A river level property closer to the base of the elevation with the slab foundation, you could be looking at $2,000 to $5,000 a year or more. So when you're doing your monthly payment math, mortgage, homeowners insurance, property taxes, and flood insurance, you need to add that to the calculation. Now for properties in that area, that's an extra $200 to $400 a month that you need to budget for. And here's the thing I want you to watch out for. Sometimes you'll see a property with an existing flood insurance policy that looks cheap. It might be $800 a year when you'd expect it to be higher. That could be a legacy policy from before the new pricing kicked in. The law allows FEMA to raise rates 18% per year until the policy reaches its actuarial rate. So that cheap policy today could be significantly more expensive in just a couple of years. So you always got to get a fresh quote. All right, let's say you found a property you're in love. What does the flood risk mean? So here's what I look at. And this is the stuff I wish someone had laid out clearly for me when I first started doing this research in this market. First is elevation, not just whether it's in a flood zone. What is the elevation of the first finished floor relative to the base of the flood elevation? Every foot above the base of the flood elevation makes a meaningful difference in the actual flood risk and what you're going to pay for insurance. Ask for an elevation certificate. If there isn't one, you can have one done by a licensed surveyor. It's usually about $500 to $1,500, but it's worth it. Second is the foundation type. In this area, post and pier foundation is most what it is. When water comes under the house, it comes and goes without necessarily getting inside. On a slab, on a grade foundation, it's opposite situation. Water hits it directly. Third is access roads. This is one I didn't hear talked about enough. During a major flood event, you might own a property that stays completely dry at 35 feet, but if every road leading to your house closes at 33 feet, you're stuck. Fourth, prior flood history. Ask the seller directly, has this property flooded? How many times? What depth? Has the flood insurance claim ever been filed? You can also ask your insurance agent to check whether the property is on the FEMA's repetitive loss list. That's a property that's had 2 or more flood claims over $1,000. That status affects both what you'll pay for insurance and how FEMA treats future claims. Fifth is septic. A lot of properties in the rural parts of the area outside of Guerneville Sanitation District are on private septic systems. When the water table rises during a flood, septic drain fields can fail. Tanks can float. It's a real consideration. Get a thorough septic inspection, ideally timed after a wet winter storm, so that way you can see how it performs under stress. Sixth is mold. This is a big one. If a property has documented flood history, I strongly recommend a mold inspection by a certified industrial inspector, not just a standard home inspector looking with a flashlight. Mold can live inside the walls, the cavities, the subfloors, and insulation. And even after a property is being cleaned up, it can still be present. This is not something that you want to discover after you move in. I also want to briefly touch on the legal side of this because it matters. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving you any legal advice. But in California, sellers are required by law to disclose whether the property is in a special flood hazard area. It's part of the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report, or NHD report. It is a standard document. It's a statutory document in every California real estate transaction. As of January 1st, 2024, there are also expanded requirements around climate risk disclosures that include flood zone information. But here is what I want you to understand as a buyer. The NHD report is not a starting point, it's a finishing line. It tells you whether the property is officially mapped in a flood zone. What it doesn't tell you is whether the property has flooded before, whether there's an insurance claim that's been filed, or what the building restrictions are for future improvements. Now, it's your job and your agent's job, if you're not working with me, to dig deeper than this form. And on that note, if a property is in the F1 floodway designation, which is Sonoma County's zoning overlay for the most restricted areas directly in the channel corridor, there are some serious limits on what you can build or add. No new permit structures on undeveloped floodway land, major restrictions on additions to existing structures, and if you have plans to expand or add an ADU or do major renovation, you need to check with Permit Sonoma before you close, not after. Listen, let's step back for a moment from the technical stuff for just a second, just to talk to you like a real person. Now, I know this is just a ton of information, and I know that some of it might seem heavy if you've already fallen in love with a particular house or a particular community up here. But here's how I actually think about it. The people who live on the Russian River aren't unaware of flooding. They know. They've watched the river come up and come down. Some of them have evacuated. Some of them have had water in their homes. And most of them, not all, but most of them still love living here, and they don't plan to leave. So what makes the difference between a good Russian River ownership experience and a nightmare is not whether the river floods, it's whether you bought the right property at the right price with realistic expectations and with the right protections in place. Listen, a well-elevated cabin on Post and Pure Foundation above the base of the flood elevation with flood insurance in a community that's a close-knit and resilient, that's a very different homeownership experience than on a slab-grade bungalow at River's Edge with no insurance purchase by someone who thought flooding was overstated. Knowing which one you are buying. And if you're a second home buyer or a vacation rental investor, also factor in the same atmospheric river events that cause major flooding typically hit January to March. That's winter rental season. During significant flood evacuation orders, your rental income stops and your short-term rental calendar goes dark. Budget for that. Listen, let me give you a quick checklist of what I'd actually do if I were you and what I am doing right now. And if you want a copy of this checklist, just click the link below and I'll send it over to you. Number one, look up the property at the FEMA Flood Map Service Center at msc.fema.gov. Make sure you're seeing the July 31st, 2024 map. That is the current one. Number two, get a fresh NHD report from a reputable provider. Don't rely on a seller-provided report from a prior transaction. Number three, ask the seller directly. Has this property flooded? How many times? What happened? And was a claim filed? Number four, get a flood insurance quote specific for the property before you remove your contingencies. Not a ballpark, an actual quote. Number five, if the property is in the special flood area, consider getting an evaluation certificate prepared by a surveyor. It costs a few $100s to a few $1,000s, but it can impact what you pay for insurance and whether you might qualify for the flood insurance to be removed from the designation. Number six, check access to river roads. And that's when it closes. Remember, I will link the gauge down in the description. Number seven, if the property is on septic, get a thorough septic inspection. And if it has flood history, add mold assessment. Number eight, if you are planning to renovate, add a unit, expand, call Permit Sonoma to confirm what's actually permitted under the F1 and F2 zoning overlays before you commit. Listen, we're moving here knowing all of this because I did the work. I understand the risk and I found a way to make it make sense for my life. I think the Russian River Valley is one of the most special places in California. The redwoods, the river, the community. It's genuinely unlike anywhere else. And I want people who are thinking about buying here to have the full picture that they can love it the way the locals do, with their eyes wide open. So if you are thinking about making a move up here, whether you're relocating or looking for a weekend place or just starting your research, I'm happy to talk. No pressure whatsoever, no pitch, just a real conversation about what this market actually looks like. My name's Chris Spade. I am a realtor with Keller Williams. I'm moving to this area myself, and I have spent the last several months going deep in this market so I can actually serve the people here the right way. My number is 619-818-2992. You can call or text anytime. I'll also link some of those resources that I mentioned, the FEMA flood map, the NOAA gauge, Permit Sonoma. All of that is going to be in the description below. And if this video was helpful, please subscribe. I'm going to go deep on a lot of this stuff and what it actually costs to buy and live up here, what the market looks like right now, and what you need to know before you make a move. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.